Maybe some of you don't know who I am, so let me introduce myself. My name is Jeanne Ewald. I'm from Olathe. I grew up here and I graduated from Kansas School for the Deaf, went away to college, and ended up moving to California. I go to a deaf church called Mission Spring Community Church. And they have a deaf program there with a deaf pastor. And we have also established a Thursday night Bible study that I go to faithfully. I miss it once in a while, but I love to go and learn about the history of the Bible. And my husband, who's named Eddie, let's show the next slide. This is my husband. He's a great guy. Anyway, Eddie's dream his entire life was to visit Israel. And he signs it like a little differently than we do. Because Israel means sweet honey and milk, so he signs it a bit. Now here we initialize it and use the I, but he uses the full hands. So I'm going to try and follow Eddie's way, but if I revert back, you'll know that I'm still talking about Israel. Anyway, he told me a few years ago that he really, truly wanted to go to Israel. And you know, I am not a big traveler, but Eddie loves to travel. He loves to explore different countries. I'm more of a homebody, you know, and when I travel, I usually come here because it's home, because I can come and visit my family and help with the DCC and then come and visit Deaf International Community Church, of course. So anyway, we talked it over, and you know, I really wanted someone else to go with us. So I asked a Christian couple that were friends of ours to go with us. So we got together and decided to customize. In other words, we were going to design our own trip. We didn't want to go any of the hearing tours or any of the large groups, whether it was a deaf group or a hearing group. We didn't want to do that because they are so rigid in their scheduling. We wanted something a little more flexible, and we wanted to just be the four of us. We wanted to get our own driver and have that person guide us. We thought that would be a more comfortable way to do. So I got a hold of a travel agency that was run by a deaf woman. Her name's Peggy Poser. And it's called D, which means deaf, of course, capital D, deaf, dash, travel agency. And it's based in Rochester, New York. So we corresponded. You know, I never ever went to her office. We never had to sit down face to face. We just corresponded electronically and made our plans. And it took us about 8 or 9 months to plan it. Now the four of us would meet every 2 weeks. We'd go, either they'd come over to our house to eat, we'd come over to their house to eat, and so forth. And we would pray about our plans while we were developing them. And then toward the end, we were getting in contact with Peggy on a weekly basis until we got everything ready to go. You know, we bought our airline tickets, we had to put down quite a bit of money. We hired deaf local guides, and their sign language was so different than ours. You know, the travel agency director was hearing, but she was a coda from Holland, and she had deaf parents. And so she would employ deaf workers over in the other place, in the other countries. This was a guy, his sign was Joe. He was really tall. I mean, I was straining my neck to look up at him. And he hired one guide who was from Holland. And then he even hired a hearing interpreter. And their sign is like this, which is kind of our sign for cooking, but it's their sign for interpreting because that means going back and forth between two people. Anyway, he got a grant to pay for the interpreter fly to Israel and tour. So there were the 6 of us plus the driver, so there were 7 people all together in our party, and we were together for 3 weeks. And it was an incredibly rich experience. Now when we traveled, we focused mostly on 3 areas, 3 concepts: biblical history, history, of course, and then we had to visit the deaf communities. I'm really fascinated by learning about their cultures, by eating with them, by visiting with them, visiting their homes, and we were able to accomplish all of that. And then our third area of focus was we wanted to visit, not necessarily the Bible history, but we wanted to visit the landmarks in the area, which also included some biblical things. Now we went to Israel, and we went to, you can see this map of Israel, and you can see Israel is very, very short, very small compared to America. You know how big the United States is. And when you get to Israel, it just looks like a little tiny place. I don't remember exactly how many miles it is from boundary to boundary, but it's very small. We drove through the desert. It felt like it was a long way, but they don't have a great highway system like we do. We've got I-35, I-70 that just bisect the whole country, and it's really easy to travel in the United States. But that's not true in Israel and Jordan. And there are only 2 airports that they have. I was hoping that we could just fly from city to city and save our time, but we couldn't because there's only 2 airports. You fly into Tel Aviv, and they sign it kind of like chicken by your eye because it's so sunny there. So it's the biggest airport in the country, and it's very modern, very nice. It's got a huge menorah as soon as you fly in, and then there's several menorahs around the airport at various places. It's very Jewish. And then we came to a small town, Elia. It's right down here at the start. And in Aqaba, Jordan, there's also got another little airport. But that's it. That's all they've got. Otherwise, you've got to ride the bus or take the train or drive by car. Because like I said, a small country. So we flew into Tel Aviv, and then we went north to Haifa. And that's where they build missiles. It's a very high-tech area, and lots of deaf people work there, but a lot of them have retired, and they've really earned good livings while they were there. It's been an interesting experience talking with those deaf folks who worked in the rocket manufacturing place. Then we went to another place, Galilee, to the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus had done his preaching and met the disciples. After that, we traveled down to Jericho. The famous Bible story about the people marching around Jericho. There was, 300 Jewish people against 10,000 soldiers, and they would march around and around the city 7 times. And then when the horn blew, the walls came tumbling down, and all 10,000 soldiers of their enemies were perished. So then we traveled south. I know you want to see some pictures, and you will very soon. I've got so much to share with you. But first of all, I really want to thank God for giving us that opportunity to see. And I thank Debbie and our friends for giving me the opportunity now to share this with all of you. Maybe some of you will be inspired to visit Israel someday. And if you want to, get a hold of me, and I will be glad to give you advice. And I'll give you the contact information of the agencies that we used, because they've already had experience putting this type of a tour together. So let's move on. Now, Israel is a holy land. It's the land of the Bible. It's the land of faith. But oh my word, there are so many different types of churches there. There are Catholic Church. There are Greek Orthodox churches. There are Hebrew churches. There are Armenian churches, Armenian Catholic churches, a lot. There are Muslim churches. I'm showing you the signs that they use in the Arab area. There's such a rich diversity within Israel. And there is history records of this Holy Land going back over 5,000 years, even before Jesus came on the scene. And those places are still there. Now, some of them have been destroyed, but you can imagine what people's lives were like 5,000 years ago. You know, you can walk through the desert and ride through the desert. I'm really happy I live in modern times because we can just arrive and I can buy water and everything's pretty convenient here. But there, they have to walk or ride in the scorching sun. And you can imagine how they lived back that many years ago. I have a great respect for their history. You know, Israel has never been a peaceful region. Historically, it has been at war for many, many, many years. And there is no peace there now. You know, when I was there, I felt okay. I could see there was a lot of oppression. Obviously, there was lots of oppression. But everything was all right with my group. We had lots of faith. And we were there for 3 weeks, and it was just a beautiful trip. No one got sick. There were no mishaps at all. You know, we just had a really great time for 3 whole weeks. It was amazing. You know that it straddles the divide between Africa and Asia. It's this little tiny piece between these two great continents. It's like a little tiny infant country. Now here's Tel Aviv and Old Jaffa. It's amazing how the Roman Empire worked. They just gobbled up the entire region. And they just, even in old Israel, you will see lots and lots of ruins, and you'll see the remnants of the pride of the Roman soldiers. It's just incredible to see all of this still there. Now the airport is clear on the south part of Tel Aviv, and we stayed in a very tiny hotel. It was kind of like a hostel. It was very cute, but nice, and the food was really, they fed us well. You know, breakfast was amazing. It was hard for me to believe that I was in Israel because we had very, very nutritious foods. There was no pork, because you know that Judaism does not eat pork, so we had no bacon or ham at all. We ate a lot of fish, lots of different types of fish. We had herring and cod and a wide assortment of seafoods. And this was our view. That's the Mediterranean Sea right there, and it's huge, of course. So this was Tel Aviv, and now go on. Now I notice there's some errors in my spelling, so please forgive me for not spelling things quite right. Now this was called Old Haifa, and it was under the Roman Empire, and it was also part of the Ottoman Empire, and there was lots of war going on there, and people were, you know, I really felt sorry for the Jewish people because they were constantly losing their homes and losing all their stuff and having to move. No, the history of the Jewish people is just fascinating. So this coming here helped me to understand the history much better, and I really appreciate their history more now. Now, do you all remember the Bible story about Jonah and how he tried to run away from God, and then he was swallowed by that gigantic fish? Sometimes people say it's a whale. Well, that's the Old Testament story. We don't know that this is the exact place, but this is the region where that occurred. Where he was swallowed, and then he came to his senses, and then was vomited back out on the beach. So anyway, that's where the region was where that happened. Remember, Bible history was one of our big focuses that we wanted to look at. Well, now we are switching away from the biblical history to the study of the deaf communities here. And I wasn't able to take lots of pictures because of their Deaf Cultural Center, so we could compare it with ours. It was very nice, but I didn't. Anyway, it's just kind of a building. And when you go there, they require the Israeli shoulders to come and study deaf culture. We saw a lot of young shoulders who had just graduated from high school and go straight into the armory for 2 years. And almost everyone was carrying a weapon. You know, the car next to us would have a weapon, or in the bus we'd be sitting next to a soldier who carried a weapon. I mean, I wanted to take pictures, but that would not be polite. I mean, they would go for their 2 years of training, and then they would be disseminated to their different places of service. This was our deaf guide here. His name was Omar, and we signed it kind of like vampire. He was a young guy, full of energy. He's like, well, y'all want to go swimming at the beach? And I said, no, we are senior citizens, remember? I want to go tour. And he was ready. He had beach towels, he had sandals, he had his shorts, and he was ready to go to the beach, but we weren't. So he had to change his plan. It was pretty funny. He was a really nice young guy. This was a deaf museum. The next slide, go on up, one more please. Yeah, right here. They call it a visual museum, and it was absolutely gorgeous. People gave private donations. The government also contributed funding to build this beautiful place. And we went, at one time, we went to a deaf-blind play in the area, in Old Haifa. It was truly astounding to see their performance. And there were lots of hearing people who came to the audience, and they would hold up placards that said, please sign, and then they would hold up placards to show I love you. So they were actually teaching a few simple signs to the hearing audience before they came in to the performance area. This is our friends from California right here. This is our Dutch guide. And that young guide is our Tel Aviv guide, or driver. Now here we are at the deaf-blind play, and it's fascinating. That troupe of actors, well anyway, those people had been moved from Russia, they'd immigrated because they were Jewish. And they wanted to settle in their Jewish homeland, where they were not the outcasts. So they moved from Russia. It was an amazing journey, and they were such brilliant people. And they also were paid performers. That truly impressed me. See the girl on the swing? She had lost her vision when she was 15 years old. She remembered being able to see. She grew up deaf and then lost her vision later. And she was a wonderful actress. She had a rich imagination, and she was incredible. And they are world famous. They travel worldwide to different countries and different cities, and the government supports them. They are funded by the Israeli government. And they were all deaf-blind actors. Every single member of the troupe was deaf and blind. And there's Haifa. Now this is north. We took the train, and that's where I saw lots of soldiers with their weapons. Was on the train, actually. It's about an hour and a half train ride from where we were to get to Haifa, from Jaffa to Haifa. And on this tour, we got onto a bus and took it to the very top of the country, or the top of this hill, and then had to walk all the way down those stairs. And people call this Elijah's Cave. And they like to come and have their private meditations and private worship time. They feel like it's a very holy place where they can be in the presence of God. It's quite interesting. So we went there. You know, of course we followed the Jewish culture. We had to be, there was a separate entrance for women and men. The men had to put on the yarmulkes and then go in and do their devotions. And the women went in and sat and read the Hebrew Torah and had some conversation and meditation time. So you can see there's the women's area and the men's area. And then we went all the way up to the top, and we had to, it's about 2 or 3 miles of stairs coming down that hill. And you can see the tip. You can see the tip of Lebanon there. But we were not allowed to go into Lebanon, and the political situation is not allowing that. And we were not able to go to Syria. But we could see both Lebanon and Syria from Israel, or from Jordan as well. So that was very fascinating to me. And here we have Nazareth. That was a thrilling city to visit. I'm sorry I forgot to put in 2 pictures. The first place, well, let me think. The first thing I visited, I think, was the Catholic Church, or it might have been a Greek Orthodox church, but anyway, everything in this part of town was historical and ruins. And they had to dig down underneath the ground, and we had to go down underneath the ground, and we saw that the people survived there. That while they had wars, then they would build on top of the city. So really the ruins were under the ground. So when they excavated, they found all of these wonderful ruins. There were all kinds of artifacts that they had on display, and you could see deep down where where the angel Gabriel had come to meet the Virgin Mary and inform her that she was the chosen by God and was with child and would name him Jesus. That all was underground now. So I took a picture of that. It was just a fascinating place to visit. And next we have, this is a baptismal experience. I was baptized for the 3rd time. The first time was when I was about 11 years old, and then I was baptized as an adult because I understood the significance better. And then my husband said that we must be baptized there. My husband grew up Catholic, and he's not a practicing Catholic any longer. He now has adopted my church, but boy, he enjoyed learning so much. So we went ahead and all 4 of us went through a baptismal ceremony right here. And there were fish swimming in the water. It was like, ew. There they are. We took a step in, and the fish scattered. It was really very chilly. And there we are, you can see. Of course, we had swimsuits underneath our drapes. So yeah, it was modest. And a lot of fun. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And there was no pastor. I mean, we did not have a pastor to go with, to come with us, but we went ahead and just baptized ourselves in the Jordan River. And that is also where Jesus had gone. And we sat on this very wall and looked over the scenery. It was just beautiful. But Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River when he was young. And these are the places that Jesus actually walked and taught. This is where he spread the gospel. He told the good news. And this is the area that he was at. That's where he traveled. And he walked a long, long way. Remember they had no cars. They didn't even really they had donkeys and carts maybe, but mostly they walked on foot. And here we are at the Sea of Galilee. And that's where Jesus had recruited his disciples. He called Peter and James and several of the people who were fishermen to come and follow him. And that was right here at the Sea of Galilee. We took a little brief cruise for there. And on the Jewish Sabbath at sundown, everything closes. And the Arab people then take over the tours, and they keep working. So we were able to take a tour with an Arab person. So we went to the St. Peter's restaurant. St. Peter was a fisherman until Jesus met him, and then he became a disciple. So there's still a lot of fishing that happens in that area. Oh, and this is just kind of a funny picture of Eddie. I mean, I don't eat fish. I'm not crazy about fish, but the fish were huge. I wish I liked to eat fish, but I don't. So I had chicken. But all of my friends ate the fish, and when they were done, they lifted up the bones, and sure enough, they had been caught that morning and cooked for lunch. So they were incredibly fresh and delicious. And there you can see one of the fish skeletons. Oh my word, this was one of the highlights of our trip. It's truly a different world at the holy city of Jerusalem. And the Wailing Wall is there. It's amazing. Here's just some pictures of Jerusalem. When you walk into the city, you immediately are struck by how ancient it is. There are 4 quarters within the city. One quarter is Muslim, another quarter is Jewish, the other one is Armenian, a Christian Armenian. Armenia is close to Turkey. It's mostly Catholic, but also Christian. It's a big, big population. And when we walked in, we were immediately struck by how ancient it is. And that's where Jesus carried his cross, on the street of Via Dolorosa. He carried it an entire mile, winding through the streets of Jerusalem. I cannot imagine how Jesus suffered. He must have been exhausted. And he dropped his cross, and then he went through all that ridicule, and then someone helped him to carry it all the way up. That whole thing just makes me so, it's heartbreaking to think about how people tormented Jesus on that trip. So this is so historically significant. We saw lots of different churches, as you can see up there in the right picture. They were beautiful, the architecture was beautiful, the designs are ancient, they're just absolutely stunning. And this, I wanted to thank our deaf guide here, because our deaf guide was Orthodox Jewish and did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, but we had polite conversations and he was a wonderful guide. So I thank him so much. I can't remember his name. I think it was Jose F. or something, maybe Josef. But anyways, you can see here, you can see the dresses that we're wearing. Well, when we went into Jerusalem, they were very strict. We must be covered to the wrists and covered to the ankles. You are not allowed to use short sleeves or sleeveless attire. And this was about the only dress I had, and I thought, well, maybe I'd better pack a caftan. It should be modest enough, but it wasn't. There was one Hasidic man who came to our deaf group and really gave us the what for, because we needed to be more fully covered, completely covered. So I had to leave and then find something else to wear that was from neck to wrist to ankle. That's just it's an interesting facet of the Hasidic Jewish culture. And they do have some kind of rebellion against the government. And there's a lot of we can see lots of signs that people are still rebelling against the government. And you can see this sign where they mourn the 67-year existence of the state of Israel. So there is still quite a bit of discord there. And it's interesting to see how frugal Jewish people's lives are. There's no technology, they don't have washers and dryers, they wash their clothes by hand and hang them on the line. We have washing machines and dryers, and we have it very, very easy compared to them. And this is Salam. It's just a very simple life, and it's fascinating to see how they get by. And you see men walking on one side of the street and women walking on the other side. So there's a lot of oppression still. And we were a mixed group, and so we got some looks from folks. And then I would just turn my eyes to the ground, and you could see women always walking with their eyes lowered and their heads bowed. They didn't really look people in the eye and greet each other and hug and all that, So they had to walk with their heads bowed. It's just a very interesting culture. Well, and here's a picture of the markets. I always like to visit the different markets. And it's kosher, which means the rabbis have got to make sure that the meat comes from an approved place, and that it was the beef and the lamb and the chicken was all prepared in the approved manner, and then it would be certified kosher. So the food was delicious, and the bread was amazing. Anyway, let's look at the next slide. This is true Jerusalem food. You see that guy with the big beard? The dark beard? That was our guide. He'd been to Gallaudet, and he lived in America for maybe 7 years, and then moved back to his homeland. He was from a deaf family, and he was strongly Hasidic. You know, he had to he changed his hairstyle for us so that we would feel more comfortable talking with him. Anyway, here's some of the streets that we lived through. It's in the center of town. This is my favorite picture. You can see these cute schoolboys walking behind their father on their way to school to study religion. They study religion mostly, and a little bit of literacy and math and science. They heavily study the Torah, and that's how they're raised. The father was also their rabbi. So most of the men in Iran and most of the leaders of the families were rabbis. So they were rabbis, very orthodox, and taught their children. This was our guide. And you can see that I was standing because I was not allowed to enter the Dome of the Rock. It's an Arab area. And I wanted to go in, but I was not allowed to. You have to change your garb, and we didn't have any of the stuff to change into. So it's actually a Muslim place of worship. There's a strict delineation between the Muslim world and the Jewish world, but the architecture is absolutely beautiful. Now this is the Western Wall. It's also known as the Wailing Wall. It's where people would go in grief after the temple was destroyed. And this is a part of it. You know, it was there during Roman times and during the Ottoman Empire. So there was lots and lots of confusion going around because some of the areas were Roman and some were Ottoman, and I kind of got a little bit confused about which was which. You have to really study the architecture to know which belonged to the Ottomans and which belonged to the Romans. I mean, there's a lot to study and learn about here. It was so hot there, you know, and I was complaining about the heat, and look at these folks. They are garbed in wool coats, in their wool hats from head to toe, and they are Orthodox, and they are not complaining at all. You know, I guess I'm just wimpy. I hadn't grown up in this kind of a culture, but they just took it instead. And here we are. This is right before we went into Jerusalem. And Eddie put his hat on. You know, a lot of people had shorts. That was fine. It was interesting. You know, the men were able to worship there, and the women all went to another place where they would write little prayer slips, praying for the peace of the world, and then roll them up and stick them into the wall. Once our prayers were done, then we had to walk backwards until we got to the end and then could turn around and walk front way. That was just the way they did things, and so we fit in. We learned a whole lot about how they function. And there were so many people there really were wailing. It was heartrending. You know, the whole historical significance. And it was so sad that they didn't really realize that Jesus had come to forgive us from our sins. They didn't have that, and so they were still wailing. And down here in the lower corner, this is where Jesus was crucified, where he had carried his cross all the way up. Now, we don't know if this was the exact place, but there was a Catholic church and a Greek Orthodox church had really taken over many of these historical places, but I have to thank them for preserving the history. I'm so thankful they did take over some of these areas, because this is where the Bible stories happened, and at least it's preserved for us to see. I can't remember what this is called. It was called the Holy Sepulchre. The Holy Sepulchre, and this is where Jesus was supposedly crucified, where his body was taken to be prepared for burial. And next we have Oh, we had to wash our hands before I was allowed to worship, before I was allowed to join the women at the Wailing Wall. We had to cleanse ourselves, and we were not allowed to have sleeveless attire. Luckily, I had short sleeves on. You know, another time I went with a sleeveless shirt on, and I was not allowed to enter until they gave me an overgarment to cover myself. There's the Jewish community, and the next one over is Arab. And we couldn't walk through there to see it at all. It was just totally walled off. Next we have, this is where the Hebrew people lived. It's so incredibly crowded. The apartments and the homes are just all mushed together. It was fascinating to see. You know, we have such nice homes here. They're comfortable, we have space between them. There is absolutely no space between the Jewish apartments. And this is where Jesus was crucified. People come here and add their tears to the floor. There's lots and lots of folks that come in there. Then there's another area where his cross was actually erected, but they're pretty close together. This is where I talked about the Via Dolorosa, where Jesus carried his cross. This is quite an interesting experience for me because I don't like to go underground. I have a bit of a phobia that way. And they asked me if I wanted to visit the temple, and I didn't know what they were talking about. I said, sure. So it was just kind of a last minute plan. You're supposed to make reservations, but we got our guide got us tickets at the last minute, and we went down there, and it's like, oh my word, I'm going down in the dark. I mean, they had lights and fans, but what I did not realize, that when the temple was built above ground in Jerusalem, they had tunnels to store their water in cisterns. And lots of Hebrew soldiers would come and have their meetings with their superiors because it would be cool down there. And that's where they would strategize as they were planning their battle plans. So that was interesting to me. So there was a beautiful picture of the temple there, and they started to reconstruct it, and then it was destroyed again. And so it was really, the ruins were under our feet. So we walked for an entire mile through this tunnel, and I was feeling a little anxious, and I wanted to go back, but he said, no, come with me. So I was right behind the guide, and that comforted me some. And sometimes it was a little wider than others, but thank goodness it wasn't too hot. I mean, I was sweating because of my issues, the anxiety that I was experiencing, but we finally made it through and we got outside. It was really, though, a wonderful experience. And these are just the daily people. This is just their everyday lives. They sell grapes and lettuce to make dolmas and sell those things on the street. These are deaf folks, and here's some deaf folks having a card game, and they could get together every Friday in Jerusalem and play cards right over here. So next we have, I'm going to talk now about Palestine. And the sign for this is kind of like fine on the shoulder that the fingers come in. So we've talked about Israel, and now we're moving into Palestine. It's in the West Bank. And I know you guys have heard a lot of negative things, a lot of negative media reports about Palestine and the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which is it abuts to Jordan. It shares a boundary with Jordan. But let me tell you just a little bit of history about this area. The Arab people have took over Palestine during Jesus' time. It was a mixed population at that time. You know, they were very welcoming. They invited us to their deaf club. They gave us food. I mean, we were absolutely stuffed, and they were, oh, come eat more. And the deaf folks there were just so thrilled to see deaf Americans. They said, why don't you Americans come? Are you all afraid of us? And we said, sorry, I guess I'm just brave. And they've were so grateful that we were there visiting them. Now the Jews and the Muslims have to go to the same school because they're both deaf, and so they develop very close relationships. Whereas the hearing folks are politically divided, and the deaf people just don't get that at all because they have grown so close that they have really good friendly relationships with each other because they all go to the same mainstream program. They don't really have any deaf schools, but they go to the same educational programs for deaf children within the public school. And they make no delineation about their heritage or their religious preferences. So that's why they have such peaceable relations. Now in Palestine, the people were upset from 1947. The Jews massacred the Muslims. They lost their homes. They had done nothing wrong. Now the U.S. and England really controlled the Jewish people, Israel, up until World War II. And then they were deciding what were they going to do with Israel. You know, we had all these concentration camps and things like that. So they gave the Palestinian area to Israel. You know, there's been lots and lots of wars trying to get rid of slavery and oppression. And you know, the Jews have been dispersed all throughout the world. And the Muslims and the Arab people have just stayed there in the West Bank for all of these years. Their families are there, and historically that's where they are from. Now, once the Jews came back to Israel, they decided to try and reclaim the West Bank. And so that's led to lots of wars. And people on both sides have lost a lot. So the Israeli government is still trying to relocate people and trying to give money so that they can relocate and settle their homes, and so they're having to negotiate with the Palestinian folks who live there. Even though there's a grudging respect on both sides, relationships are still very, very cold. And when we came in, we would open the houses, will have doors, and they open onto a huge courtyard, and that is an Ottoman type of architecture. You know, they use a lot of heavy stone to make their homes, and it's just very, very interesting. So you have to step up, and then you have to step down through these thick wooden doors into the courtyard, and then go on into the house later. So let's see the next slide. I love this deaf lady. She was a strong leader within the community. She was one who was encouraging women to regain their rights, and she encouraged education for children. Now her husband was German, and so when they moved back to Germany, they lost a good leader there. You can see this bulb right here. Well, next to it, I met an 81-year-old deaf woman whose eyesight was going down due to age, so she'd become blind, but she was so sweet. And she was a seamstress. She sewed wedding dresses. I mean, she can't see to do that any longer, but she did back when she could see. And we talked and had a nice conversation. And she was so thrilled to have some deaf visitors, especially from the United States. It was really inspiring to her. And the next person is her brother's wife back there. And when it was time for us to pray, she knew it was time to pray. You know how Muslims, they have the minaret that has the call to prayer, and then people all flock to the mosque, or they pray at home, or wherever they are. If they're at work, then they get their prayer mats out and they do their prayers. Well, she knew. As soon as she heard the minaret, someone would flash the lights, and once they saw the lights flashing, she knew it was time for her to pray. And I thought that was great that they figured out a way for her to know when it was time to pray. They didn't need to come and get her in person. They could just use the light switch. And this was an unfinished building, because people do not believe in borrowing money. They do not believe in going into debt at all. They wait until they have enough funds put aside, and then they hire builders to come in. So you see lots of homes that are unfinished because they're waiting to get the funds. so that they can continue working on it. You know, that's so different from our culture where we borrow at the drop of a hat. People were so friendly with us. They had a movie that we saw that was a true story of a deaf man, or a little deaf boy who's now 84. But he had gotten on his bicycle with some other friends when he was young, and he saw a group of people that looked like they were soldiers, and it started massacring the deaf children. They started shooting them. Now that guy who was on his bicycle fell off his bike and was shot in the, I think, both shoulders and both legs maybe. Anyway, he had 4 gunshot wounds and he played dead. And he saw a guy who was trying to make sure that every deaf child was killed. Deaf children, they were totally innocent. But this guy was playing dead. And when the coast was clear, he finally crawled to a tree where he collapsed. And some Jewish people saw him and took him immediately to the hospital. His family, of course, was terrified and didn't know where he was. And they finally found out. They were just embraced him. And that has been made into a movie that just drove me to tears. And we're trying to get the information out about what the effects of war are. But anyway, it was a beautiful story. So next we'll go to, the next slide is Bethlehem. There's lots of different signs. This is one sign for it. It's like shaking bell. But this is, this was in Palestine in the left bank. They signed it one way. It's kind of a dangerous area, but that's where Bethlehem was, in Palestine, and that's where Jesus was born. Bethlehem means house of bread in Hebrew, and in Arabic, it's translated as house of meat. So a couple of different meanings there. This is where King David was born, and then Jesus was born later. So you can see the genealogy was passed on at the same place. And the Basilica of the Nativity is where the angel came to tell the good news that Jesus had been born. And then the shepherds flocked to that area. Okay, here we are. Can you see the lady in the red shirt? She didn't know, she did a lot of research, and their sign for Jesus is done with the index finger. And that was fine. She was learning about Jesus, so it was nice for us to be able to plant a few seeds about Jesus while we were there during our social times. It was a great experience, and we just loved her. Did you see the guy with the hat? He was an American guy. He was bright. Well, he wanted to go to the university. He wanted to teach deaf children. That's what he wants to do. So he really is strongly in favor of supporting the deaf community there. This is the church where Jesus came in. And let's go on to the next one. Now I've got to tell you the story about this. I'm going to try and keep this to 30 minutes. I'm sorry if I'm going over time. But you can see that gigantic key on the top of the arch. Well, remember when the Israelis tried to banish the Palestinian people, or tried to hurt them or kill them all, then they would take their keys and hide them in their places of refuge, so that when it was safe, they would come back to their house, and they wouldn't know where their papers, where their deeds and their keys were, and the Israeli people would not let them back in, because they would not have their documentation or their keys. And so that's how they lost a lot of their homes. So the news started to spread that, when war comes, take your key and your deeds with you before you leave your house. I mean, that's just an example of the tremendous oppression they were experiencing. So that happened, that started in 1948. That's when Israel was recognized as a nation. And that's kind of when the whole brouhaha escalated. Even though it was really the Palestinians' homes, they lost them. And here's where Jesus was born. This is the manger. I mean, they've certainly fancied it up now. Because, Jesus was born in a small manger with the horses and the animals around. But this is pretty elaborate. Now Jericho. That's where the walls come tumbling down, where the 300 soldiers were going up against the 10,000-man army and marched around the city, and then the walls came tumbling down. Well, it is the oldest city on earth, and it was the first town that was conquered by the Israelites. And this is kind of what it looked like where the walls came down. This isn't a great picture, but anyway. This is what it looked like. I thought you would see buildings and ruins, but they were all underground, remember? So this is what it looks like on top of the ground. And when you come, you can take a camel to the mountains where Jesus had experienced his temptation and then went to the 40 days and 40 nights for fasting. We sign this. They sign it like napkin, kind of from side to side, where they're not allowed to eat or drink. It's fast. And that's where Jesus fasted and prayed for 40 days, and this is the area. It was just absolutely beautiful to see. And here we are, we came up to the very top where Jesus had prayed during his 40-day fast. And next we came to this place. I'm sure you guys have seen the movies or heard stories about in like 912 or whatever, when the Jewish people found out that the Roman soldiers wanted the Jews to become slaves, then the Jews rebelled. And they recalled the Masada area. Well, the Masada was where King Herod had built his dream vacation home and also his tomb. I mean, how they did that long ago, how they carried all those huge stones and all the carpentry tools they needed to make it, it's amazing. But when you get up there, you can find that, oh my gosh, you get up to the top, they've got food and wine, and they've got an aqueduct, because it's in a very arid land. It doesn't rain much at all. So it's amazing the intelligence that went into planning for that all those years ago. And the Roman soldiers would see that and say, well, how are we going to get up there and take over this place? So they started to build a ramp. Painstakingly, they built this ramp. And the people would see the soldiers and say, well, they're getting close, what are we going to do? So they'd call the folks to get together, and they'd have a lottery. They had little rocks with numbers on them, etched in them. They'd have 1 through 5 or whatever. And maybe if the family was the number 1 family, then that would be the one. If their number was drawn, then that was the one who had to sacrifice their children, and so forth. So they took turns. There were 900 families in that area. But there were a few people who wanted to survive. They wanted people to survive to be able to tell the story later. So not all of the families were involved, but they had a few children. I don't remember exactly how this worked. But they were exempted from the lottery, and so they were able to tell the story. And so by the time the Romans got there weren't any people left to conquer, because they had taken that into their own hands. So I thought that was interesting. And you can see this plateau here, this rocky plateau. Well, the king's compound was down around the side of that, and there were 3 residences actually. And here it overlooks the Dead Sea, and I did have experience swimming in it, where it's so salty that you just float, but then when you're done, you feel very gritty and kind of covered with this salt, mud, slime. But this is a view from the top, and next we have, this is where the king's home was. And I almost passed out because I didn't have enough water. I was becoming dehydrated. So I quickly drank a lot and decided I wasn't going to go all the way down there. I decided I needed to rest and cool down a bit. So my husband made the trek and was able to look up at the mountaintop. So he made it down to Herod's domain. And this is another example of how people live. They have rooms and bathhouses, and there's still a lot of Roman architecture influence seen in that area. Now this is Hebron, and it's signed kind of like peach, or like pear. And travel guides strongly recommend for us not to visit Hebron. However, our tour guide was an Arab, and he knew how to get us in there safely. So we were able to actually go in and tour Hebron. You know, and things are pretty much the same as they were. The architecture's old, it's kind of in disarray. I mean, it's a very impoverished country, or city, excuse me. And Hebron is the largest city in the West Bank. It's full of political discord and lots of murders and lots of problems. The Israelis and the Palestinians have conflict there all the time. It's complicated. There's a lot of generational anger that's built up there. Their education system is not so good. You know, it's very patriarchal. And the historical stories are just carried from generation to generation, so the feud continues. There's also a military checkpoint you have to go to. To get into the city of Hebron, you have to go outside into an Israeli settlement. And there's a division between Hebron and the Jewish settlement. So when I would try to go up to the mosque, I wanted to go up to the mosque to meet a deaf person who worked as a janitor in the mosque. And so I'll show you that next. I'll show you that slide next. Go on to the next one. Here we go. You see the guy with the purple top? He was the custodian for the mosque. He had 2 wives. His first wife was unable to have children, so he found another wife. That's the Arab way. They allow multiple wives. And finally he had a baby, and he was so proud of his child. And there's the mosque in the background. And you can see there's the military checkpoint with the soldier in his arms there. He's talking on his radio. And they were talking whether they should let us come in or not. And the janitor's like, oh yeah, come on in and see the mosque. And we said, can we? And he said, oh yeah, sure, I'll get you in. So we had to change into Muslim garb, which we did to be able to go see it. And it's kind of a sad thing, but do you see those two? They had to stay. They were not allowed to come into Jerusalem. So we had to separate from them. And this is the mosque. We had to come up these narrow stairs. And this is our local guide. She was a great deaf gal. She was Muslim. And she wanted to go into the Jewish temple because she was so curious about it. She'd never been in. And I said, well, come on in. You look like one of us. We'll protect you. So we snuck her in with us. And she was pretty amazed because she had never seen that. You know, sometimes it's a little bit easier if you're deaf to just kind of blend into the deaf crowd, so to speak. And there was a dividing line. Did you remember the story about when King David slept with the maidservant and had the boy? And then excuse me, that wasn't David, but remember when Sarah got jealous because Abram had slept with his maidservant Hagar and had the boy. Well, anyway, this is where that happened, and this is where the dividing line was. So the Arabs went in the one direction, and the Israelis went in the other. And the monument is huge, but you're not allowed to go into it. You can see through, and you can see where the Arab dividing line is, and you can see where the burial tombs are, where the one that was from Hagar is buried and the other one is buried. And that was very fascinating, but we weren't allowed to enter. And this was my very favorite place to go. This was the deaf Bedouin village. They are absolutely beautiful people. Their homes are nice. The government supports them quite a bit. because the Bedouins lived in refugees camp, kind of like refugee camps. They're nomadic people, of course, so they don't have any type of permanent water system at all, but they know how to survive. I don't know how they do it, but I applaud them for it. And the Israeli government decided that they were going to go ahead and donate funds for them so that they could build boxes, is what they call them, box houses. And the roads and things are horrible. They're potholed, and the government will not help them with their roads or their streets, and so they're just full of potholes and very hard to traverse. And people throw their trash out all over the Bedouin village. The Bedouins are really, really looked down upon. And there's one Bedouin family who had lots of deaf children. They were kind of like Martha's Vineyard, so to speak, you know, lots of deaf cousins and stuff like that. Well, one of my good friends from San Diego did a lot of research on that family. And so they arranged for us to meet the deaf family that was there. And that was a really wonderful experience. But you can see how trashy it is. And there's the rest of their farmland out and rural area out around there. Oh, this little guy was my favorite. He was so curious. He wanted to play with my phone, so I gave it to him. And I said, or my camera. I said, do you want a picture? So I gave him a picture, and then he took a picture of me. And his mom took it and scolded him and told him he was not polite. So I couldn't interfere, but I felt sorry for him. Because he just wanted to talk and play with me. He was so cute. He was my favorite. And you can see here's the sheep. There's lots of sheep around. And they would shear them and then use the wool to turn into yarn and weave and make blankets and rugs and things like that. And that's how they earned their living. This was one of their homes. When you walk in, there is no furniture. You have to sit on the floor. And you eat on the floor. And you take off your shoes and sit in. And then when you're there, you have to sit with your legs crossed. And you know, my knees are bad, so I would sit with my knees behind me. The whole point is you cannot show your feet. That's a terrible sign of disrespect. And we ate some really yummy food. I mean, they are oppressed, of course, but you know, men sit on the outer circle with the guests, and women have to stand outside with the children. They are not allowed to eat with us. They had to stand and wait until the men and the guests were done eating and had our fill. And then we would move outside to talk and take pictures, etc. And the women would come and eat whatever was left. And if there was no meat left, then they got no meat. And if the children had no meat left, they got no meat. But they just accepted that as part of life. Here's this beautiful deaf family. Now there's one man, you see him sitting with the blue shirt. He was hearing, and he had married a deaf woman. And he had 5 wives and 27 children. And most of them were deaf. Just pretty amazing, isn't it? You know, his story was interesting. There was a lot of gossip about him, but it was very interesting. Now, this is the deaf family over here on the left. You see the Mehana, I think that was her name. And then next to her, you can see the woman with the other shirt. Anyway, she was the one that the San Diego University woman had studied. And she'd gotten lots of funding to study their sign language and their community and to see how that had all gotten underway. And next we went down to the very tip of the country where the Red Sea, I get confused between the Dead Sea and the Red Sea. This is where the Red Sea is, in this little town of Iliad. What we're pointing at is we're pointing at Turkey, at the Turkish mosque. And they had, that's where the Turkish people had made their exodus into Israel. And here I am touching the Red Sea. We were just in Jordan briefly, or I'm just going to talk briefly about Jordan. I'm almost to the end of my presentation now. It's known as the Valley of the Moon, and it's beautiful. You know, we slept in a tent by the sea, and one night was enough of that for me, but the moon was gorgeous. You know, it's a valley that was cut into the sandstone and granite, but you know, you can have to, it took us 4 hours to get there. There's lots of Bedouins who live around there, and they live in tents. They don't really have houses that are permanent at all. They have tents because they're nomadic people, of course. And this is where we rode for 4 hours through, and you know, to sightsee. And we could see that it had quite red sand. It was just very interesting. And here we have Petra. This is a very historical place. It's quite interesting. It was excavated, and they found that it was built as far back as probably 312 BC, more than 300 years before Christ. And you can see lots of carvings in the stone. We could see tombs in the mosque. We can see where our brother Aaron was probably buried, where Moses' brother Aaron was buried. And this was a great center of trade. You know, the Israelites are great traders because, you know, they had such prized land, and so they would establish their business hub there. We walked 2 miles through here, and we finally came through and saw where the building was. Can you imagine? They carved this into the solid stone. Okay, next we went to where Moses had led the people, and where God had led Moses and allowed him to see the promised land. This is called a Madabah. And that's where mosaics are just replete around there, and it's just beautiful. It's known as the city of mosaics, in fact. And here you can see the map that's on the floor, that's made, you know, the Greeks built on top of it. And this is the site where they built. And this is where Moses stood and overlooked the beautiful land of milk and honey, the promised land, where he knew that his people would move and stay. So next we went to, moved on up the mountains. You know, remember we were there for 3 weeks, so now we're in Amman. And here's where I met lots of Christian deaf folks. And it was so nice to meet other Christians in an Arab country. But this man here was a wonderful deaf videographer and translator. He would translate the Old Testament and the New Testament, just like Jeff Missions does in Council Bluffs. Well, they have a very similar endeavor in Amman, Jordan. So I really want to support them. Let's go back for just a little more. Here we are. You see this building up here on the right? This is a school for the deaf, and it's a beautiful school. And it's run by the Dutch church, and has run it for many years. The children are overjoyed to be there. One brother named Andrew went to look for refinancing, or went out to the refugee camps, you know, from people who were from Syria and other places, had gone to refugee camps, of course, and he found some deaf families with deaf children and brought them to the school. So I saw 2 of those boys from Syria who were learning and writing and just very happy. It's just a wonderful school. You can see this blue ear right there that shows it's the school for the deaf. So it's a very, very nice residential school. Oh, we love this guy. He was a brother. I mean, they call him Brother Andrew. He was from the Episcopal Church in Holland. And he signed beautiful ASL. He signed Dutch, he signed Arab, and he wrote a manual that was like an Arab Sign Language manual. He was just very accomplished. And he would eat with the students, just like at the deaf school. You know, they ate family style, and they played the Lord's Prayer, and then they would do a Muslim prayer, and they even hired deaf Muslims as teachers and as a principal. He was very open-minded to that. He said he wanted this open to Muslims and Jews as well. And everyone was very happy. It was really a beautiful, beautiful school. Now here we have the deaf students. They had a great vocational training program where they focused on making mosaics and just beautiful artwork. And this little girl was just so curious. You know, their sign from America is this. It has to do with the stars on the flag. So she came and asked us if we were from America. And we said, yes, we were. And she asked all kinds of questions. She was just adorable. And next we've got, oh, I guess that's it. All right. Well, that's all I've got. That's kind of my whole trip in a nutshell. And if you want to talk with me more, come and see me outside or talk to me another time. And, you know, we're going to let Debbie take back over the show.